Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
Ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we return to one of the most celebrated works of epic fantasy currently ongoing in the world today. There's not many of these left. You know, you've got your Game of Thrones, you've got your King Killers, and then you've got this...
Right, those are ongoing, aren't they, technically?
Oh, they're ongoing.
I was like, I don't know if you want to say this is...
But what's exciting about this one is it's ongoing, and there's like deadlines and progression bars and a strong confidence that it will continue. I'm, of course, referring to the Stormlight archive by Brandon Sanderson.
That is exactly what we're going to be discussing today. Mm-hmm. But not just any installment of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. We're well done. We're going to be talking about Words of Radiance. That's book 2 in this series. And you know, we had a ton of fun talking about book 1, Way of Kings. That was a while back now, back over the summer. And we had Steven from Phantology on, who is awesome, super knowledgeable about the Cosmere and about these books in general. Now Charles and I are braving the Cosmere, just the two of us. We are far from experts in the Cosmere. We should probably clear that up. On top, we've read a decent amount of the Cosmere. I think, I mean, especially me, not to brag, but we're far from the people who have poured through all of this, gotten super invested in the copper mine or anything like that. But we are big fans of Brandon Sanderson and his work, and we're hoping to dive into this one and share our enthusiasm about.
We have opinions, guys. Really interesting.
We do have opinions. Do we? The level of interest remains to be seen, but we do have opinions. So anyway, without further ado, maybe I'll just give the spoiler warning and we can dive in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about Words of Radiance, book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, with no holds barred for the first 2 books. So just up to this one. If you haven't yet read Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, then now is a good time to turn this down in your headphones, because here comes some spoilers for those 2. But if you haven't read past Words of Radiance, that's okay. We won't be spoiling anything beyond that.
Very well said, Dylan. I have not read past Words of Radiance. I know you have. It is impossible for me to spoil this series because I have no idea what's coming up. But I do know what's in front of us right now. And what's in front of us right now is a behemoth of a book. I just want to put into context here. This book is 398,000 words, 1,088
Sometimes it feels like that many pages.
105 chapters, and that includes a prologue, 14 interludes, and an epilogue, 21 POV characters, and 178 POV changes. That's an insane undertaking. In this book alone. What's interesting
is, though, if you remove all the instances in which a character refers to Shallan as clever or witty, it actually brings it down to 852 pages, Charles.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. It becomes I need to get that edited version. But I wouldn't want to miss it. And if you take out any mention of poop, it becomes 1 page less than that. So there you go.
Right. Yes. That is fair.
Which is not a lot of words, but maybe it's a little bit one too
ourselves many. in shard plate. Is that the... Yeah. I mean, not the strongest exchange in all of Sanderson's work. I don't think that conversation.
I don't hate it.
But, well...
Maybe because I was a little curious, but, you know. We'll get into our opinion on Sanderson's dialogue, which Sanderson has many strengths, many strengths, but dialogue for me has always been one that I've had to like warm up to when I go back to a Sanderson novel after taking a break. You know, we read some authors that write incredible dialogue. You know, we're talking about Abercrombie, and we just read Fonda Lee's work in Jade City.
Put respect on his name.
What did I say? Just Abercrombie?
Just Abercrombie. So I'm just thinking there's a lot of Sanderson fans that aren't huge fantasy fans in general. So you just hear Abercrombie, they're going to think about clothing.
And we read Jade City by Fonda Lee, and just a couple other different series in between our read of the first book, The Way of Kings, and the second book, with Words of Radiance. So coming back into Sanderson, always an exciting moment, but also like a little bit of an adjustment for me. But it's interesting reading his like latest series, right? And we were talking about this right before coming on the air too. It's like, this is like Sanderson's described it as his magnum opus, right? He's come up. He was writing. He helped famously finish Wheel of Time, and he has the Mistborn trilogy, and he's always expanding the world of Mistborn, and he's got a bunch of fantastic series behind him, built a huge fan base, and now he's like, this one is for me, and this is my magnum opus, and this is everything that like excites me about fantasy writing, and I'm putting it into this work, and this is going to be the big giant masterpiece. And coming from a author as prolific as Sanderson, that's a big thing when it's like, this is going to be even bigger. And already he's delivering with his massive tomes, door stoppers of books.
I believe I've heard him call them Chihuahua killers as well.
I haven't heard that one. That's funny.
Yeah.
This would definitely kill a Chihuahua. If it fell like off a table 6 feet.
Do not leave... Right, exactly. Do not leave this on the edge of a table if you own a Chihuahua, because they could end up in danger.
Toy poodles, kittens, puppies, hamsters, any small animal.
Ferrets.
Ferrets.
But despite the fact that he's prioritized writing these books for himself, he's let himself indulge in ways that he definitely would not in a lot of the other books that he has thought to just try to make the reading experience as easy as possible. In this one, the first book, he basically starts with like a prelude and then a prologue and go through all that. And in this book, Words of Radiance, he has all those interludes that you mentioned, and they'll just throw us into a whole different setting with characters we're completely unfamiliar with. And even you get through the whole book and you still don't know why some of those were relevant at all. But in Sanderson we trust, of course, because he's shown us time and time again that he has the ability to take all these disparate threads and pull them together in an extremely satisfying way. And he definitely does that again with Words of Radiance. Generally speaking, he's got a wonderful conclusion to this one.
Indeed, and as indulgent as the series may feel, it's also his most celebrated at the same time. I know a lot of fans consider this to be his best work, and I can see why his enthusiasm is really shining through on these. And when you've like followed Sanderson over the decades and you've fell in love with Mistborn, I mean, those books are relatively tight and constrained, especially compared to the Stormlight archive. To watch him just he's bought so much goodwill, and he's delivered, as you've said, on so many fantastic reading experiences, that he's like, now let me challenge you even more. Let me make these worlds even bigger, and let me bring you into this wider adventure. And coming from The Way of Kings and going through Words of Radiance, that world really does open up. I feel like Words of Radiance kind of opens the world even wider than Way of Kings was. I feel like there's a lot more going on here, to like what you alluded to, Dylan, of the the increasing interludes of random POV characters, and we're getting all these characters together, but there's all these greater mysteries going on, magical abilities, and all these other things are growing and growing, and we're along for the ride. And like, it's Sanderson we trust. I've always felt that way. I have more confidence in him than like almost any other fantasy writer in the game, because he just knows how to take his fantasy mind and bring us all into it and still deliver on the reading experience. So we should kind of get into the words of Radiance a little bit to kind of back up that claim, because I think we're both on the same page there. This book, like you had pointed it out, Dylan, and I hadn't realized it, and I see it's written like in all the bios and stuff, that every book in the series so far has like the flashback character, I guess. Is that what we're calling it? A main character?
I don't know what we can call it that. People will know what we mean, which is that each book takes a particular character and allows them to get their past fleshed out through these flashback scenes. So if we want to call them flashback characters, the first book we had Kaladin, and we got a lot of his history fleshed out. And this book we get Shallan as a person who receives the spotlight in that way.
Exactly. And that's an interesting take. I kind of like the use of flashbacks as like the backbone of a book, and it's like, oh, this is this character and this is that character. It's an interesting approach. And I guess when you have a book as sprawling as this one with as many characters as this one has, it's kind of interesting to see different characters take the spotlight. Like, I really enjoyed Kaladin's background. I thought the themes in that were very strong, and getting to kind of watch Kaladin getting challenged in a lot of ways, and trying to be honorable and trying to do the right thing while also like killing people and things like that. It was a tough balance for him, and that was a strong part of the Way of Kings. And now you have Shallan, who has been kind of, it's interesting for her because her main point of view, she's kind of repressed all these memories about her like tragic upbringing, and it's not till the end of the book that you figure out these things that she kind of ignores in the present day but are so informative, all these tragedies that she's experienced. And that was just a really interesting extra dimension to the character that we wouldn't have gotten just from her POV today, being able to look back and watch her like with her abusive father and with her brothers, and how she was like quiet for a long time and learned her voice, and then we know who she is today and how much she's had to change to get there. It's fascinating. It's an interesting little plot device.
It is fascinating, and it does keep us grounded in one character's story in a way that is important in a book, like you said, that's so sprawling with all of these different characters. And Shallan's an interesting one. She's the character of the main point of views, which I would say that's Kaladin, that's Shallan, and that's Dalinar. Those are the big three here. And of those, she's the character that receives the most hate, if you will, or at least flack. And I see the critiques. I even made one of them earlier in the book.
You do see it, huh? Interesting.
Yes, I do. And I think that I don't hate Shallan as a character. There are things I like about her. And then of the things that I don't love, Sanderson has this habit of, I guess, just telling us over and over again when it's almost always these like witty female characters. That's a theme among Sanderson's writing for whatever reason. You definitely see it in Elantris, which I don't think you've read.
I've not read Elantris yet. Elantris, no, I haven't.
Elantris, yeah, I think that's the correct pronunciation. But yes, Elantris. You do see it in Warbreaker as well, which is one that you have read, Charles, and now you see it here in the Stormlight archive, and especially in this book. And I think, I don't know, like Sanderson kind of has a generally like, to me, feels like corny sense of humor. And then it's fine. Like, it's actually funny sometimes, but where his strength does not lie is in these like funny little clever quips. Like, I just don't think that's his sense of humor as much. So it's like almost like dad humor, I guess, which is how Sanderson writes. So, and he is a dad, so it makes sense.
True.
But
that makes sense. I would agree.
Yeah, but Shallan is not a dad. And everyone keeps telling her how clever and witty and smart and all this stuff she is. And it just feels very tell over show, right? And that's like writers' rule number one is show, don't tell. It's like you think of a character like Tyrion in Game of Thrones. It's not us hearing all the time like, ho, 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 Tyrion, there you go with your clever quips and one-liners again. It's just us hearing him make clever quips and one-liners and being like, oh, this character is super clever. So that's one of the weaker points of Shallan. I do want to get into the stronger points, but I'm sure you'll have things to say on this whole topic, and we'll get back to some of the stronger points after. Charles.
I've always, and we've talked about this before on the show, even as far back as like our first episode when we did Mistborn. It's when, you know, Sanderson, I love so many of his characters, but that one kind of style of his for when he writes clever, to me it's like it takes me out of it a little bit when he's writing the clever dialogue, because it's always like witty thing and then wordplay on witty thing and then wordplay on witty thing. And it's like no two people would ever talk this way, and I don't even think what they're saying is anything particularly clever a lot of the times. Like, it's like, oh, you repeated what I said and you twisted it a little bit. Like, it's just kind of annoying. It's like anyone can do that. It doesn't make you clever. Like, what makes you clever is your ability to solve problems or figure people out or this or that. And those things I'm much more interested in than the, like, one-lining each other for dialogue. It's also very similar to how he writes flirting. Like, flirting is this exchange of, air quote, clever witticisms. And you're watching this happen and you're like, okay, well, these characters, I guess, are flirting right now. That's interesting. And I'm brought back to, like, the noble parties in Mistborn when Vin was interrogating Ellen Venture. And, like, those dialogue exchanges of them just, like, making fun of each other. And so it's kind of cute. I actually
like that relationship.
It's cute. It can be cute. Vin. It can be endearing and cute.
That's a little spoilery maybe for that. We won't tell you where that relationship goes, but
no, they're just two characters that
they do have exchanges. You'll know what Charles is. Yes, you'll know that pretty quick in Mistborn.
Right. Yeah, but I won't talk anymore.
But go on, Charles.
But I'll say that comes up in this book quite a bit. It comes, and because Shallan is such a clever character, and this is Shallan's book, so to speak. It happens a lot. And because this book is 1,000 pages and almost 400,000 words, it happens a lot. And you're like, she's doing all these interesting things. She can draw. She can, talk to this Sprenish character. And she can do all of the pattern, I should say. And she can do all of these interesting things. And her backstory is super interesting too. This is someone that killed both of her parents. Like, this is someone that murdered both of her parents and never thinks about it, like cold-blooded. So it's like, this is an interesting character.
Metal.
That is as metal as it gets, man. Like, come on. So I'm like, where is all of that? Like, why aren't we talking about this? And it takes to the end of this book to the scenes where she's killing her dad, and I'm like, go Sanderson, I didn't know you had this in you, because it's so long now we've been like out clevering this person and out clevering that person and flirting with this person and flirting with that person and talking to pattern, and you're like, okay, and it's like, oh, and now I'm gonna strangle my dad, and you're like, oh, interesting. I like this, let's do more of this, please. It's something interesting.
Yeah, and the point of the character, for sure, as you alluded to, is her denial of the all these horrible things that she's been through and done in her past. So we don't get a lot of that in her present. And in her present, she's almost intentionally, I don't want to say a shell of a person, but she's intentionally depicted in a way where she's not willing to evaluate herself at length in depth. And she wants to keep things very surface level, like, oh, let's make a little joke out of this, let's smile, let's banter. And that is her way of coping. It's very different from what we got from Kaladin in the previous book, where he's a dweller, right? He is someone who ruminates about his past, and he really gets down on himself and overthinks all of these things. So they're very opposite in that way. But Sanderson pulls off the, I guess, is it a twist? Is it fair to call it a twist if it's something in her backstory?
I think so. The way it's told, it's like this big reveal.
Yeah, and it's pretty savage, but really awesome. I think how he writes that she killed both of her parents, especially it's like the dad, you can kind of see maybe that's where things were heading, but the mom is a surprise because it's always played like, oh, his dad was such a violent guy, and you know,
it's like, okay, she killed her dad, that's pretty bad, but you didn't realize that she had already killed her mom way before that, and you're like, oh, it's like interesting. And
it flips the dynamic from like other people, like her defending her dad and not making it all about how like, oh my God, he killed my mom, what a bad person, which we're kind of taking for granted as readers, that probably is what happened. And then we find out that actually it's been her dad this whole time protecting her, by not saying, when all these rumors are abound that he killed his wife, at no point does he try to, you know, turn it toward Shallan, which is the truth. And then we put together that, oh, wow, she killed the guy who's been sticking up for her in that way for this long. So it makes all of it so complex and interesting. And that's the strength of Shallan as a character in her story.
And, you know, as much as we were ragging on her constant one-liners, it is a good, like, I wish there was a bit more of a clear connection that was, like you're saying, Dylan, like putting up walls, kind of coping with her repressed memories of the horrible things that she's done with her to her family. And it's like, oh, now I'm just constantly speaking surface level witticisms because I don't want to dig any deeper. I'm afraid what I might find if I start to think about stuff and dwell on stuff. So it is an interesting character trait for someone that has tried to repress their past and some of these stronger feelings. But I don't know. And these also coupled with this
Charles,
naivete too. Go ahead.
Yeah, we'll get into the naivete for sure. I think that it's Sanderson conveys it relatively well when you're seeing Shallan from Kaladin's point of view, and when they're in the chasm, and she's like, in his head, she's like this smiley, like, oh, nothing's gone wrong in my life because I'm a noble and you know, I'm a bright eye, so I couldn't possibly have suffered anywhere near in the way that you have, Kaladin. That's how he's perceiving her. And then he kind of comes around to understanding, oh, like she's just putting on a smile. Like she's actually a really, in his eyes anyway, like strong person for being able to power through all this and smile and laugh. And there's some moments, I don't have the exact quotes, but where he's like, how do you smile through all of that? And she's like, well, otherwise I'll go crazy. Like, so it's in there. It's a little bit more in the subtext, but maybe for Sanderson, it's better when he keeps it somewhat subtle like that, because I think when he strays, it is when he tries to like beat you over the head with like don't you see this character's like this? So
Yeah.
it's like
I do like. I'm glad you brought
there.
up that scene of Kaladin and Shallan in the chasm, because that was a very strong, interesting scene for me, and I knew right away when they met and Kaladin was like, "I hate her." I'm like, "Oh, they're going to like develop feelings for each other." Like I'll almost
Ooh.
guarantee it. And so they just need that excuse, right? They need that thing that forces them together, and this idea that they were the only two that could survive this fall into the chasm because they could both use Stormlight, which was a
Draw
kind of
from
funny
Stormlight,
interaction
yeah.
between the two of them, because they were both so quick to get away with the fact that they used Stormlight that they didn't question why the other person also survived. They're like,
Well,
oh
they
shoot,
both were like, I don't know how I saved this other person, but I guess I did.
They're both like, oh, what a relief she doesn't realize that I did this thing.
Yeah.
And they're willing to kind of not scrutinize the situation because they feel like they got away with it, right? So that was a really funny, convincing layer of intrigue there to keep the two of them kind of clueless about their powers. Which, when Shallan takes out the sword blade later, that was so much fun. But shard blade, I mean, sword blade, shard blade. That was a lot
sword
of fun.
blade.
You know, he does that sword blade thing and then stabs the like giant bug thing. Yeah, but I like those.
We
scenes.
said we aren't Cosmere experts.
Exactly. Yeah, we weren't kidding. We were not kidding.
Giant
but,
bug thing.
But no, that's a good scene because
Chasm Fiend. We do know that.
Hey, we got it. Because they're very skeptical of each other and they call each other out, and it's almost kind of cathartic for me in some ways. I'm like, okay, I can start to like. Now that they've acknowledged these faults in each other, I feel like I can move on a little bit with these characters. And I did kind of buy that they were winning each other over and kind of developing this bond between them, not only through the shared experience of barely surviving, but of like actually having personalities that kind of complement each other. Like you were talking about, Dylan, of how, you know, Kaladin's the brooder and Shallan's the like just keep it high and light to survive, and the two of them together are like, oh, an interesting perspective of the world, and they kind of both come out a little bit more open-minded from the conversation, especially Kaladin, who was very like, you're noble and I hate you and you're dumb, and he's like, oh wait, like she may have had a not great go of things like me. That's kind of interesting to think that could be possible. So that was a really fun scene, and I enjoyed just our two main characters also getting to spend some alone time together is fun too. We know these two characters more than anyone, so it's just really entertaining to see them together and like going at each other, I suppose.
Yeah, and a much more compelling duo when they're together than Shallan and Adolin. I mean, I don't know. Shallan and Adolin, the relationship, hopefully I don't get any hate for this, but a little bit of a nothing burger of a relationship for me.
A little bit of a
Adolin is not my favorite
I like
character.
that nothing
either,
burger has entered our lexicon here on the show.
Right. That's 2 straight episodes
Who
with
did we
nothing
call
burger.
nothing burger? I'm already
It was a
forgetting.
character in Abercrombie's work. It was Leo Denbrock's dad. Harrod Denbrock was described as a nothing burger.
He is a nothing burger, but not to talk about
Adolin,
it's a great work.
Adolin in himself, I'm not saying he's a nothing burger, but I do think the relationship itself is a bit of a nothing burger for me, because it's like, I don't know, they just kind of see each other and they're like, oh, this person's attractive and different from the other people that I've seen, and they're already engaged, or they say like betrothed or betrothed. Something.
They
betrothed.
I know they were potentially
betrothed.
It wasn't like a sure thing, but it was discussed.
But preliminary betrothal. I forget the exact word for it, but and they're just immediately like, oh, I'm interested in this person, and it's, I don't know, I don't really understand why, besides the surface level, like they make sense as a pairing. Like politically they make actually not even so much like why is Shallan really a good fit for Adolin besides that he's like insulted everyone else already?
I
But it's
guess.
like I don't know. They're just in a way they're alike in this like keep things light and joke around and
Mm-hmm.
generally good people. But I just don't see how they complement each other in any way or in any way that they like make up for the other. For me, like the interesting relationships are these people who complement each other, like the relationship make them greater than the sum of their parts.
Mm-hmm.
And like we're talking about with Kaladin and Shallan, they have these ways in which, oh, I could totally see how they get along with each other once
Mm-hmm.
they get to know each other, but it like they fit together like puzzle pieces in the sense that Kalan, that's a celebrity. I'm sure they already have like a shipping name anyway, so maybe it's Shaladin, but either way, Shaladin or Kalan, they like they make sense because she can keep things light, keep them moving, and while Kaladin can ground them in some semblance of like reality. Let's talk about the real stuff. Let's get in touch with it, and he's able to help her do that. They have this moment in the chasm where they're talking to each other about their past in a way that Shallan has not done at all with Adolin.
Mm-hmm.
They just kind of keep this superficial relationship that's based on nothing more than like they're nice to each other and they were attracted to each other when they first saw each other. It's like, okay, it's fine. Nothing
Interesting.
burger.
I agree with you. I think there's a little bit of something in between the buns of that nothing burger, though. I have to say, I'm not. I do agree with you in a lot of ways, but I don't think my sentiment is as decided as yours because I think back to like when Shallan and Yasna are talking on the boat. It's like, oh, I betrothed you to Adolin. And Shallan is like, that will literally solve all of my problems. Like, all of the problems I'm having with my family will be resolved. So, right away, he's rich, he's good looking, and they're cordial. And they're under the premise of that they're courting to be married. So, I think a lot of that does a lot of the legwork. I think Kaladin and Shallan needed some alone time to get to that level, but I can see why you come off the boat and you see Adolin and he's handsome and he's rich and he's like basically an heir to the throne kind of situation, and he can solve all your family's problems and this and that. Why you might have an interest in kind of winning him over. And Shallan was kind of like that. Like, I need to like win him over. I need to get him to like me, this and that. And from Adolin's side, I can definitely see why he would like her because he keeps remarking how unusual she is, and she's not like the other girls. She's challenging him, and
Which is
she's.
the lamest trope. I
But it
hate that.
reminds me of
Is
Jazal and Artie, not to do any spoilers for First Law, but it's a similar thing where this guy is this noble-born, tropey, self-absorbed character, flippant character, and then all of a sudden you have this person come in who's not going to take your crap, and you almost like them for
yeah.
that because it's like you're like I start to feel like there's a real relationship here. It's not the superficial nobility nonsense. It's something unusual and real, and it is a bit not like the other girl tropiness, but I think in this case it is kind of good. I think Adolin, the whole last book was a flipping womanizer, like forgetting who he's dated, and the woman come up and slap him, and he's like, "What was that about?" And it's like to have someone who's, I guess, not afraid to talk about poop and it's just like kind of
I
opening
mean,
his
isn't that
eyes.
what we're all looking for, Charles? Is someone to just sit down and chop it up about pooping in your shard plate? I mean,
I
what
guess
more in
so.
life could you ask for?
I mean, if I
I
was
mean, maybe
Dalinar,
I'm
I'd be
just
like, "Can you marry someone from like a
like,
better house?" But like, I don't know. Maybe he's like, "Well, we'll
I
see if
think
they actually love
Dalinar at
each
this
other."
point is like, Dalinar at this point, I think, is just like, you know what? If I can get him married to someone with like a brain,
Also,
I'll
Yasna
take
wasn't
it.
making the arrangement too, so that gets you a little bit of a bonus.
Yeah.
So,
For sure. And Shallan does a good job of like making her case too. I think maybe this was a conversation with Dalinar, where she's like, okay, you know Yasna pretty well. Like, how many wards has Yasna taken on in the like entire time that you've known her? And the person talking, let's say it is Dalinar, is like none. And it's like, how many have wanted to be her wards? It's like, many. And it's like, okay, well, what does it say about me that I actually am, or what actually was her ward? And he's like, okay, that makes sense. So I like the Shallan and Dalinar interactions. Like, she has a read on Dalinar pretty well. It's like, this guy's a pretty straightforward dude. Like, you can talk straight to him, and he'll understand. So
yeah, and she kind of comes through her naivete, which is another kind of thing in this book where she's constantly realizing she's like playing too much of her hand when she's trying to deceive people, and she'll like get embarrassed, or she'll like realize she said a little bit too much. It's like, oh, I could have said a little less. Like, you know, she's always like, she's learning how to be like a Yasna, like I'm going to like be an authority someday. This idea of earning that authoritative title, even though she's born into nobility, and she was trained by Yasna. She does keep this humility about her, which is interesting also. And this idea of like, you know, she's really smart, but she's also still learning how to play the game, kind of. Like, she's still very naive when it comes to being subtle and like trying to convince people of things or deceive people or cover things up or whatever it is. It's all in there with Shallan, but it's like, you know, this book was 1,000 pages. It's like there's so many scenes where she's talking to people, like she's talking to, oh my gosh, that's the slave wagon person. Is that Tavlak or something like that? What was her name?
Are you talking about the not the one who was mentoring her?
Yeah, she like became a mentor to someone, and it's Tin, Tyn. Is that
Tin?
Yeah, because she's the one that's like when she was first like washed up on shore from the boat, and then it's like, you know, you can't actually free those people, right? It's impossible. You're getting them to believe this lie that you promised them, and then
Tin. Sorry, I'm seeing it here in the
okay,
notes.
It was Tin. I got my names confused, but that moment where it's like you can't like pay off the debts of all these people. It's impossible. And she's like, no, I think I can do it. I'm willing to try. This idea of like she's trying to step up and become her own person, and I guess she's also kind of facing her past at the same time. It's an interesting progression for Shallan.
Yeah, and she gets there eventually, I think, and she is, I think, a character that shows development over the time by nature of like adapting other people's characteristics into her own personality. Like she takes what she likes about Yasna and starts to embody that in some ways. She takes what she likes about this character Tin and then tries to embody that in other ways, and then eventually using her powers, she's even reached a point where she's able to take on a totally different personality in Vale, which, by the way, probably would not be my choice for what to call a fake person that I'm pretending to be. I probably wouldn't be like Vale, you know? It's like a veil. Like, you know?
My name is Incognito.
Yes, Bobby Incognito. That's my alter ego. So either way, though, yeah, she takes on this character, Vale. It's kind of interesting where Sanderson's going. I don't know if he's really pulled it off with the deft yet to this point to make it like too that compelling, but it's kind of interesting that he's toying with this idea of Shallan separating herself from Vale, where she's like, oh, I wish Vale were here because she'd be better equipped for like going through the chasm and dealing with Kaladin, all this stuff. Where yeah, she actually considers Vale a separate person. So something to monitor is like Shallan's sense of self, and if it's starting to deteriorate.
Right. And it gets to the point, I think, with the Ghost Bloods, right, where she kind of reveals her true identity at the end. So to your point,
well, it gets revealed.
Right. She gets exposed.
They figured it out.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that all of these kind of other identities are falling apart, and then it ends with her as one of these, Knights Radiance like characters. So I mean, it's an interesting theme that he explores. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Shallan now that we've got the full story. I'm excited to see her kind of mature a bit, and I'm interested in this love triangle, man, I gotta say, because I like that it's...
Wow. Didn't know you're a love triangle guy, Charles.
I mean, when it's there, I think this one's interesting, because you have Kaladin starting to admit some feelings towards the end of like, oh, he looked for her in the crowd, and then she didn't look at him, and he was embarrassed and looked away and hoped no one looked at him or noticed him looking, like that kind of mentality, because him and Adolin are actually really getting along, and Adolin did that stint in jail and solidarity and all that other stuff, which I am enjoying. So it's like, okay, well, what happens when you start to put these characters at odds with each other? It's again Kaladin's thing of like between two oaths, I guess. It's like you have two hard choices, like you like Shallan and you're a good match, but then you're also like you're employed to protect Adolin, and he's also been really nice to you. So I don't know, it's interesting. I don't think Shallan's really Shallan showed like a glimmer of like, oh, Kaladin was interesting, he helped me see things in a different way, and he's kind of good looking, like there's little glimmers. So
she's like not in the same way that Adolin is, like a little more brooding, dark, dark, handsome guy. But she's had a little internal monologue about about potential interest in Kaladin. Do you have a side? Are you like me? Are you shipping Shaladin?
I'm a big fan of Kalan. Yes,
it's got to be one of those. I'm sure the fans in the community.
I like Kaladin.
So, let us know.
That's to me the winning duo.
Okay. So we're on the same page, and we agree that it's a nothing burger of a relationship with Adolin.
Perhaps, but let's talk about Kaladin, I guess, because I still think Kaladin is my favorite character. I do enjoy him the most, and his journey through this book is just as interesting. I mean, I like that now he's become the leader of the guard, King's Guard or whatever, and he's got his bridgeman that he brought up with him, and he's trying to protect the nobility, but he also hates the nobility, and that gets questioned a couple times. But at the end of it, he does, he is definitely one of the more ignorant characters, but then he gets stuff thrown in his face, and he kind of comes around a little bit, and I respect him for that. I don't know, what are your thoughts on Kaladin?
Yeah, I'm on this reread. For me, so far Kaladin's definitely sticking out as my favorite, but I remember by the time I finished Oathbringer the first time, Dalinar was my favorite. So I kind of want to see how this goes for me on the reread. In part, it's the next book. This might not be surprising. Dalinar gets his time to be the character that gets,
because we know some of his past already. We've gotten a few flashbacks from him, like where he was too drunk
and
to
we
save
get
his
some
brother.
Interesting foreshadowing where they say his now deceased wife's name, and it just comes up as static to him. Like, he can't even hear it. Like, so you get some of these hints that something's very strange about Dalinar's past. Right. We know he was kind of a drunkard, and we know that he, he's racked with guilt over how things went with his brother Gavilar. Although he kind of gets, like, redemption for that in here.
He does. Anyway, at the end of this book, he's like, there's nothing I really could have done, drunk or not.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, he's fighting Seth, and he's like, oh, I would have not been able to protect him at all, so this didn't matter.
Exactly.
Anyway, we're chopping it up about Kaladin, so I'll get back to him. I really like his, I guess, internal battle between, like, am I a guy that protects people no matter the cost, or am I a guy who's willing to give in to the vengeance I desire? And credit to Sanderson for the way he brings in like Amaram at the perfect time to I guess be the catalyst for that, and he also puts his character Kaladin in the position that you described, where he's got to protect the people that he's learned to hate. He has to try to trust someone who's still Light Eyes in Dalinar, but is at this point like the most noble dude around. So I think we have a really interesting conflict for Kaladin, and he's always kind of had the most interesting conflicts and like internal battles going on. And Sanderson puts him in the perfect situation to have that play out. So
he always is between a rock and a hard place for sure. But where he kind of ends up, that like famous line at the end, I will protect even those I hate so long as it is right. And that's just like something he had been struggling with this whole time, with Moash and plotting the king's assassination and trying to win Syl over in those moments, and losing Syl. So this is kind of his catharsis at the end. And I feel like he's always kind of, his actions have always mirrored that. He's always kind of done those things. Like, I really enjoyed the fight scene, the tournament there where Adolin was challenged. And was,
well, that's the most famous line from this book, comes from that, actually. It's honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do. And that's the that line gives me chills. I freaking love that. And I think it's one that the fan base really appreciates as well. So that's right before he dives in to fight alongside Adolin, who to that point he'd had kind of a mixed relationship with. They couldn't really see eye to eye, and it's a kind of culmination of this, I guess, this idea that he's going to still try to do his best to protect, but it kind of gets flipped on its head a little bit when he gets imprisoned after. So it's like back and forth with this this internal battle.
Yeah, right. And that's such a great scene where that fight scene. And this is Brandon Sanderson at his best, is writing these kind of action scenes, weighing the stakes, having the payoffs, getting the right situation in place to get there. It's masterful. Like, it's so hard to be like, and then an epic battle happened when you're trying to write a story. It's like, how do you convey that to the reader? How do you get them to feel the stakes and feel the epicness of the situation? And Sanderson nails this to an extent more than any other author in the game, really. Like, we've seen it in Mistborn, we've seen it in a few other places where these fighting scenes, these action scenes, they're well composed, and the challenges are well balanced, and the stakes are always there, and the situation, the implication of it is so good. And this was just this scene of the fight where first it becomes 1-on-1, then it's 4-on-1, then it's 2-on-4, then it's 3-on-4. It's moving all over the place. It really is masterful, and it was the most entertained I was throughout the whole book by a long shot. Like I was really pulled in to these scenes, and I wasn't stopping until I got through it. And then that's what Sanderson can do almost every time, is hook you in.
Mm-hmm. One of the best scenes in the series for sure. And everything you just said, I totally agree with, Charles. It's one of Sanderson's strengths. He knows the pieces that he has on the proverbial chessboard. He knows where to place each of them, where we buy in. And I think he just knows how to write a fight scene too when push comes to shove.
And then
no puns intended, I guess.
Was so mad he transformed into his next form, Super Kaladin, and he killed them all. It was like, no, he the stakes changed, and he was able to jump in and he stand back to back with Adolin, and they were able to fight, and other people were able to jump in, and it was fun. It was like, it wasn't corny. It paid off, and it was convincing.
Yeah. And even the moment where it's like, oh, what's going on with Renarin, where he basically starts crying in a corner. It's like, it seems like it could be just an easy plot device for Sanderson to be like, okay, well, I need him to be a non-factor. He's basically like a damsel in distress, which what ends up happening is that was actually foreshadowing for Renarin's role as a Radiant, because I believe it was because he touched the shard blade, and it was not working for him, and it was like doing that screeching in his head, where he couldn't do it, because that's what happens when you have your own spren. They don't like when you use the other shard blade. So it's that was actually really well done and foreshadowing in itself. And then, of course, there's very few fantasy authors, if any, that can write action the way that Sanderson does, because not only does he have this ability to convey what's happening that's very clear and moves the action along. It's he does it in a really beat by beat way, but also it's like, I don't know, it's like entertaining. I feel like his one of his idols, Robert Jordan, the way that he would write fight scenes, it felt too above the action for me in a lot of ways. It's like, I remember he'd be like, oh, I did Swan captures the squirrel, and which is definitely not one. But you're left with this weird
crane
what
nesting
does
in the
that
trees.
move look like?
Exactly.
Yes,
and
exactly. That's the attack I used. It's
python hissing in the sand. You're like, oh, interesting.
Yes.
But Sanderson's very technical.
It's Sanderson, we know exactly what's happening. It's so clear, but it moves. It's props to the guy. So he sets up the pieces in the right place, and then he just really delivers on the action of the scene.
Right.
So
and then what happens, Kaladin flubs the whole boon thing, which is another great moment too, where you're like, Kaladin took this idea, and this was because Kaladin's a character that we obviously see has flaws, and it kind of plays out to the advantage of the story a lot of times. It's really nice, and I love a good flawed character that's not just despicable. Kaladin is bullheaded in a lot of ways, and he's almost too honorable for his own good sometimes. It's of course, it's the honorable thing to do to let me fight Amaran right now. And then they're just no, arrest him. What are you talking about? And this guy's crazy. It was so good, where Kaladin just kind of speaks over Adolin to get the boon. And then the next scene of, oh gosh, what's his name? The guy who Adolin's trying to get the boon against.
Sadius,
thank you. Sadius. And where he walked away, he's that was a close one. He's thank goodness that I didn't have to fight him right then and there. I just got outwitted by Dalinar when I thought I had it, and I was like, oh, that's a nice little thing that he wrote in. Those scenes are funny where he's kind of like, oh, we'll just outwit them later, mwahaha, like talking with his wife.
You're doing oh god, you're doing a very oh my god, Kramer, right? That's the Michael Kramer.
Oh, Michael Kramer, yeah,
audiobook.
I was just thinking Seinfeld.
Yeah, Kramer and Redding.
Kramer.
I was like, no, Jerry.
Jerry, that was a close one, Jerry.
Yeah, Kramer has this way in audiobooks of like whenever he does an evil character, it really does sound like he's twirling his mustache, and he did a very good impression.
The mustache twirl.
Yes, we were. It was like not just the mustache twirl, but the voice. You always do better like voices on the show. Your character work, Charles, is impeccable, but it is 60
very 60 hours
like,
of listening to the guy. You pick up a little something.
Right. It's like, that was a very close one. It's like
that was
this
good.
Weird. That was okay.
Yeah.
It's just the way, and I noticed this when I listened to the audiobooks in the Wheel of Time books. I was like, I know this character's evil, like the first word that comes out of their mouth, because Kramer's doing his evil voice. So for any of you audiobook
tired to the train tracks, let's get out of here. My hot air balloon.
Yeah. But another place, while we're on the Sadeas discussion, let's talk about what Adolin does to talk. Speaking of flawed characters here, Charles, how he just basically murders Sadeas in cold blood because he's so sick of his stupid face.
A good motive for murder if I've ever heard one. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
I hate your stupid face.
I just love it.
The book is over. Die now.
It is just this. It is just this point. It's like Sadeas isn't doing anything worse than everything he's done up to that point. But it's just this point where Adolin can't take it anymore. He's like, I'm so sick of this guy, and he just lets his anger get the. I don't know. Lets his anger get the best of him, I guess, is the way to put it. But I don't want to say that because that sounds like it's making a horrible mistake. And I'm like, I was so happy when he was killing Sadeas because like, get this guy out of here.
Yeah, when a guy is that committed to plotting against you, it makes sense to kill him when the opportunity presents itself. Like, that guy wants you dead, bro. Yeah. Take him out. Yeah, it was just a nice little loose end that was tied up there nice and neatly.
Yeah, that's a memorable moment, but let's not do Kaladin dirty. We should probably talk some more about his arc. We gave Shallan her flowers for her character development. So Kaladin, he does in this internal struggle, he does flirt with this idea of assassinating Elhokar, the king. And he's even reaches a point where he's like, all right, fine. Like, Moash, tell me what I gotta do to get you in the position, and we will kill the king. Like, or at least you will, and I won't stand in your way. And this internal struggle to determine, am I a guy who protects, or am I a guy who like seeks vengeance and allows there's almost like Machiavellian stuff to take place.
Does what's right for the realm kind of excuse.
Right.
Like, he's a bad king. Downer would be so much better.
It's very, it's that Machiavellian, like, Tywin, if we're going back to Game of Thrones as an accessible example, like convincing yourself. I don't want to say exactly the line that Tywin says, but he does. Tywin does a bad thing at one point, and he in Game of Thrones, and he justifies it with like, this is actually better for the realm. Like, why is doing this worse than doing that? I guess I don't know. I can't say it. But it's a great line. Kaladin is kind of in his head like, okay, well, Elhokar's a bad king. This actually could work to be better for most people, but Syl is an honor spread, and she doesn't see the world through that lens. She's like, you don't like murder people or allow people to be murdered. That can't possibly be like the best way to be an honorable person. You got to find another way. And when he's like not aligning with that, and he basically like is stuck between these two oaths. I think you mentioned that before, Charles, where he's like, oh, I told Dalinar that I would protect, and I told Moash that I would allow murder to happen. So it's like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. And Syl just kind of vanishes. Or like at first she starts to lose herself, and then she eventually vanishes. And I don't know, I like Syl a lot as a character. There's another funny moment I'll bring up in a little bit that seemed to be a like an ode to Wheel of Time as well.
That's right. I told you to bookmark that when you texted me. I was like, bring that up on the pod. Yeah. Which is good because we're at like an hour, so I'm glad we didn't miss it.
Yeah. But anyway, she starts to disappear, and I don't know. I always find that a hard time for me in the reading process. It goes on a long time. And I like her. I like her back and forth with Kaladin.
That was a tough loss. And then Kaladin can't do all his cool powers, which is also kind of a tough loss. Missed Syl while she was gone. But it's like, you were excited when she came back, that's for sure. I agree. Big Kaladin fan. He's always so direct in terms of like, have to do the right thing, and then that kind of gets him into some trouble, and that gets him into some complicated situations where he doesn't know what to do. It's an interesting character study there of like, this is better for the realm, but I've promised not to like plot assassination, so what am I gonna do? And he even like, I like when he gives the shard plate to Moash. It's like, hey, he won these things from Adolin, and then he's like, give them away, I don't want them, I can't be seen to have them. And that I thought that was a really interesting point too. It's like, oh, this Moash character is about to become a lot more important to the story than he was before.
Yeah,
little did we know.
Yeah, and little did we know, Charles. And yeah, he actually ends up trying to kill Kaladin in that whole escape part. It's it's a really wacky scene, but we'll see. The ending gets all
the magic stuff really starts to kind of take off, and it's still not fully explained yet. So a lot of stuff is happening, and you're like, okay, I guess we'll trust in the process on some of these things that are happening.
Yeah. We also get a really awesome fight with Kaladin and Seth. That is, it's this cool, it's one of the first real like radiant or like super powered people fight. And I think it's awesome to watch Kaladin able to use his powers to say those next words and take on a character that's gotten a lot of buildup as an incredible fighter and assassin. So that was a cool scene, and we actually see Kaladin win the fight. Which is awesome. Obviously, there's this sort of like Seth gets brought back to life moment afterward. It's also complicated because Seth doesn't want to kill people. It's that he got in, like he became truthless and has to listen to his master because he said that the Radiants are coming back, and then he's fighting a Radiant. And it's like, wait, I'm why am I even doing this? So it's it'll be interesting to see where he goes. But yeah, I mean, that's we should definitely give Dalinar some pop too. But anything else
on your Wheel of Time on the reference you want?
Oh yes. Well, basically, what it is that Syl gets frustrated with Kaladin, and she just starts pulling on her hair. Ooh, I just hit my microphone. I was gesticulating with the hair pulling over here.
Pulling, yeah, as you do.
Yes, right. So she pulls like on both sides of her hair, and Kaladin, he literally is like looking at her funny, and he just goes, that? And she's like, I saw a woman do it in the market. It means I'm frustrated. So it's like this really weird moment. And obviously she doesn't even have like real hair. She's just, a spren. She's pulling fake spren hair. But if you're a big Wheel of Time fan, or even if you're just a person who's read Wheel of Time, you can't possibly escape without noticing that a lot of the characters, but especially Nynaeve, has this habit of pulling her braid when she's frustrated. Right. And I was like, oh my God. Like, yes, very iconic. I was like, this has to be a reference to Wheel of Time. Sanderson obviously finished the series, and he has it happen, and he also has the willingness to point out that's like a weird thing to do to show frustration, because he actually has Kaladin be like, what are you doing? Like, it just has him say that. Right. So I liked that a lot, and it was a moment that stuck out to me.
It's a sign of how far we've progressed in the fantasy community, isn't it? Where now
writing
we can
female
look
characters
back in life. Oh, zing. She's a spren, okay. It's not really... I don't even know if sprens have genders, but this one does identify as female.
Yeah, I think that's what matters. It's like, it's also like a weird thing with, it's like they exist because of how they're perceived by people. Mm-hmm. So it's true. Like, I guess she is a woman because that's how she presents to people. Spren are complicated. Spren gender is probably something we don't have the Cosmere knowledge to really dive into in the right way. So we'll keep rolling here, Charles.
We'll keep rolling because we do have the knowledge to at least react to Dalinar's story in this book.
Good seg.
Thank you. Although I don't know if we
get us out of the spren gender rabbit hole.
The gender spren. No, there's a spren for everything, so you never know. But yeah, let's talk about Dalinar, huh? That guy, pretty interesting fella, wouldn't you say?
That's not a great seg. What, you down on Dalinar, Charles?
No, I like Dalinar. I was just making a joke about how bad of a phrase that was. Just, fumbling the transition there. But now we're here. We're talking about Dalinar on the Friends Select Fantasy podcast.
Thank you for grounding us, Charles. So Dalinar, I think he's a character that has less of a clear arc than does Shallan and Kaladin in this one. I think because Dalinar, he's kind of already come into himself in a lot of ways. Right. Like by the time we get into this book, he's done a lot of seeing what his role is supposed to be, and he's already pretty honorable person. He's trying to do the right things. He's trying to unite everyone, and he, in a lot of ways, he is the glue that keeps the story together. He is the person, uniting everyone, or at least trying to. But he also has his foibles or his faults. He pretty easily is fooled by Amaram, who, he's got Kaladin telling him, like, this guy's a murderer, or this guy is a horrible person. And he comes back, and right away, Dalinar's like, you're going to be the first Radiant, even though you have no powers whatsoever. It's like, but you'll look damn good in this cape. So it's it's not. Dalinar will, I think, have a stronger performance as a character in the following book, but he's just kind of doing his thing. He's trying to get the Radiance back together, and he's feeling pretty good by the end with actually having figured out that there are Radiants among them, including his own son.
Renarin. Indeed. And I do like these moments where he sees the potential in Kaladin and kind of sticks his neck out for Kaladin a lot and is willing to trust him at some point. This book does make a good point of being like, Kaladin, the privileges that you have as a Dark Eyes are like unprecedented right now. But because I'm so noble and I'm so like considerate and open-minded, I'm giving you these positions. And even when he's upset with him, he's like, you know, I recognize you for your talent and your skill, and you did save my son from certain deaths, so I'm willing to overlook a few things. It's kind of a nice relationship. I think Dalinar in this book serves to kind of help Kaladin out of his bias in a lot of ways, and there is this ability to save people across the range of nobility and to be what it means to be honorable a little bit more. I think Dalinar is a bit more of the matured version of what Kaladin is trying to be. And so to see the two of them together and to see Dalinar have the time to kind of teach Kaladin a few lessons about when to like know your situation and when to step out of it has been really interesting. And now that they're all part of the Knights Radiance, it's a nice twist at the end.
Yeah, and he has this like interesting interaction with the Stormfather, where it's like that's that person in the right way, like giant spread basically, right, that is communicating with him and sending visions or stuff, and he bonds the Stormfather, and that's a big moment. So he in himself is a Knights Radiant by the end, and it's cool watching him. He gets some awesome moments. Like when Seth attacks him the first time, he basically like claps the shard blade. That's a pretty epic moment. So Sanderson delivers on that. Yes. But he's kind of just playing this role of like trying to keep the peace, trying to bring everyone together as much as he can, and he does bounce off of Kaladin in a lot of ways.
He does,
but he is super open-minded. So you gotta give him props
for Kaladin,
because
I think.
Yeah, Kaladin, he definitely gives him some breaks because of all the things that Kaladin does, and even lets Kaladin do things like arm a parchment.
Right. That's a huge deal.
Like some of these things are completely unheard of. It's easy to think of Dalinar as almost this like conservative dude, and right, meanwhile he'd be like the most liberal person in this universe. Like they're very, I think Alethi society can just be very conservative, so they don't seem like huge deals to us as outsiders. But Dalinar, the other Alethi High Princess, have to be looking at him and just being like, what is this guy doing? It's harming.
It's been a theme of these two books,
he's
to where
putting
like honor and integrity kind of supersede perceived biases and classisms. And that's kind of one of the, especially with Kaladin, one of the main themes of like, hey, like when we look past our perceived like you're a lower class than me, it's like you actually have abilities and you are actually an honorable human being. I don't see why we can't work together. You know, it's kind of like the breakthrough of this, and being able to see that in other people, even if they're not the same class as you, is kind of one of the big breakthrough things in terms of like themes for this book. Yeah, Dalinar had to trust Kaladin about Amaranth too, which he didn't for a long time. He's like, Amaranth.
Eventually he did.
Eventually he does at the end of the book, right? Where it's like, he's like, oh, you're almost like too squeaky clean. It was, I think, Adolin's thing. It's like, that guy is almost too good. You have to suspect him.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's fair. I'm with Adolin on that.
He's like, he's obviously super sneaky because his record is squeaky clean, so he's definitely hiding something. And then Dalinar kind of exposed him for attempting to, like, assassinate someone for a shard plate or a shard blade.
He tried to steal. So they had the character that they perceive as being insane, but is actually one of the, God, if I'm getting the word right, heralds, I believe.
Okay, that sounds right.
Who had their own shard blade, and they're basically keeping them in this like insane asylum style place. And Dalinar bonded the shard blade to himself, so like no one really could steal it. But Amaram tried to but I think he let the guy have it, let the herald have it, so he could almost lure Amaram into stealing it. So once he saw oh, this guy's willing to do that, I'm believing Kaladin, who's never lied to me before, and he basically calls him a murderer and a traitor.
And Amaran does be like, so what, dude? Us light eyes gotta stick together. And Dalinar was like, no, not having it. So
sort of. I mean, yeah, to some extent. I mean, I don't know. Amaram, it was a kind of weird interaction because he just leaves, and then I think it's Kaladin. It's just dude, you just gonna let him go? And Dalinar's like, yeah, well, it'd be a whole thing to try to execute him. It's okay.
That will be, I'm sure, another very interesting plot point in a future book.
Yeah, he definitely lives another day, so we'll see.
So actually, I also remember while we're talking about Dalinar, the why are Adolin and Shallan being even endorsed. There was also this idea of Dalinar being concerned that Adolin could be manipulated for political gain if he was still seen as single. So taking someone from the outside and pairing her up with him kind of took that risk out of the game. I do kind of remember that now as why Dalinar was willing to let that relationship grow. Because I said, why don't you just marry a nobler house? It's well, all these people can't be trusted now. Things are getting crazy in our house. So bring in this outside stranger and get my son tied up in that so we can't be tempted to be courted by someone with bad intent, I guess, for being abused for political gain kind of a thing. I do remember a little bit of that. Just to give some credit to Dalinar and to this Adolin relationship here, which I'm still Team Kaladin, by the way, but just an important thing to mention.
Yeah. So let's also talk about, so Steph was coming to try to assassinate Dalinar, actually, not the king. And all of this is at the orders of Taravangian, who, that was kind of an interesting subplot, Charles, and one that I wanted to get some of your thoughts on, because there's this idea of the diagram, right? So Taravangian has this weird thing where sometimes he wakes up and he's really smart, and sometimes he wakes up and he's really dumb, and sometimes he wakes up and he's super average. And at some point he had this aberration of a day where he came up with this diagram, which is just predicting everything that's going to happen in the future. And it's almost always right. There's kind of branching off points, but it's super hard to interpret. So they spent a lot of time on a smarter day trying to interpret it. And anyway, this idea of this prophecy that has been figured out, and it does have these slight deviations. And I'll say there was a kind of fork in the road situation of if Dalinar becomes a warmonger, then let him live. If he starts trying to make peace with everyone, you got to kill this guy. But anyway, Charles, you read a book a while back that you told me about, and I think it was Isaac Asimov or someone, right? Series? Yeah, was this giving you those kind of vibes to it? And if so, speak to that a little bit.
I thought it was, the Foundation series is interesting. I'll just really quickly, I know we're like pretty much past time, but really quickly, it's the idea of this guy. He was such a brilliant, like visionary, and I forget what the science was, but it's almost like a social thing where he knew so much about math and so much about the human condition that he could predict history, and so he recorded moments of himself speaking, almost like time capsules, like in 1,000 years play this message. Or no, it was just a box, and you never knew when it was going to come on, but he recorded these messages and scheduled them to play. And then the whole book is just all these times in the future of when that machine came on, and the guy was like, if this happened, then here's what you need to do, and if this happened, then here's what you need to do. And people were like, oh, interesting. And then sometimes people forgot about it, and sometimes it was just a really interesting piece. So I do kind of get those similar vibes. I mean, that was very sci-fi and way more into like how technology and society would progress over very long periods of time. But it is kind of this unique thing. I did like Televangelin being like, I could wake up at a varying level of intelligence, and who knows what I'm able to capture on that day. But this idea of being able to predict the history with a few key caveat moments was certainly reminiscent of the Foundation series by Isaac Asimov, which I would recommend. It's an interesting read. But yeah, in this case, it's a little bit more unique because it's stuff happening in like the immediate future, not so much like thousands of years.
And they're like decoding it, which I think wasn't a part of the Asimov way of doing it. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about it because
they're similar. Sure.
I remember you describing that book, so I was like, Charles has to be thinking about.
I was thinking of it as you were talking. I was like, I should bring that up, and then you asked me. I was like, oh, okay, good. That's where we're going. Yeah, no, for sure. There are those moments, and anyone that was interested in that premise should read the Foundation series. It's a lot less pages than this, but
on that topic, I read on the Coppermind that the working title for Words of Radiance was The Book of Endless Pages, but which was like unironic. Like that was because how the titles are like book names,
right?
And Words of Radiance is a book in the book. So the one he was going to use was The Book of Endless Pages, but then Brandon decided to rename it due to the irony of the book having over 1,000 pages. Good decision.
Yeah, I think so too. Although we could have had some really good jokes at the beginning of this conversation, but we had
but by that point they would be so worn out.
Yeah,
you know how many people would have made jokes by. Yeah, but I did just see Wakanda Forever, which was 2 hours and 40 minutes. So wow. I'm gonna be up all night with a pen and a pad trying to make a joke out of like Wakanda Forever. Am I right? Like forever, get it? So
stuck
that
in this theater forever.
Yeah, exactly. It's
it would have been called the Book of Endless
really
Pages.
Was Wakanda Forever.
But if you took out all of the moments about people telling Shallan how clever she was, it would have become the book of a very specific, limited, and under 1,000 pages.
Right. It would be the
doesn't
book
have
of
quite the same ring
pages.
to it, but yeah, the book of 152 pages. That's good.
Yes.
The book of 60% less pages.
All right, Charles.
That's a callback.
I think we gave... It was, yeah. And it could have been, if we really just like closed it out, it would have been like bookends,
It would have been like bookends.
Right at the beginning.
Are we not closing it out? What else do we need to mention?
We're getting close. I think we wanted to touch on the idea of Yasna coming back at the end.
Yeah,
it's kind of this like post-credit scene.
That reminds me of some
like,
other
I don't know.
I wanted to make. Oh my god, there's so much to say. Yasna.
I mean, I'll say there's nothing wrong with us doing an hour and a half or even a little bit more on a book that is over 1,000 pages.
For sure. There's a lot of meat on the bones here.
Exactly. So I think the listeners will understand. These are also people down to read a 1,000+ page book.
If
so
Adolin and
I
Shallan's
think they're not going
relationship
to be
is
like
a nothing burger, then the conversation we could have from this book is one of those, like, you see it on the Food Network, the guy has to eat a burger that's got like 20 pounds of meat on it, and he has to eat it in 10 minutes. That's the kind of
Charles,
burger.
back in our hometown, you remember American Burger, rest in peace, used to have a challenge where I can't remember how much burger it was you had to eat, but you could get your name on the wall. Yeah, Charles, did you ever get your name on the wall?
I had my name on the wall, and I had a star because I ate 2.
Oh,
you don't know who you're talking to right now.
Wow.
And that was, I remember, the most brutal.
Like in one sitting?
2. I think to get the red star.
In one sitting?
Yeah, I think.
So you ate 2 burgers consisting of 8 patties in one sitting?
They're thin patties, but it was a lot of food, bro. I went for the challenge specifically. And I remember those last couple bites where your body's just like rejecting the food is the most uncomfortable I've ever been eating, and I'll never like push myself like that again. There was a wall.
Oh, well, there was also, Charles, you have a history of trying to take on challenges of eating, because there's also the famous time where when we're in New Orleans, and
because I knew where the wall was, I gave up way before the wall, but.
Yeah, you'd never make the same mistake again that you made at American Burger.
I mean, I got to like 30 of the wings, and I was like, I could push into the 40s, but I don't know if I'm hitting 50. Like, that's so far.
Yeah, that was the bet. So I was like, we got probably 100 wings or something, because it was you, me, and your brother Chris.
Size.
Shout out to Chris. Yeah, and it was like, so I bet Charles he could not eat 50 wings, and we have a picture of this, so I mean, maybe I'll post it.
You've only posted like
again.
50
I believe I brought this up in a
years.
Mistborn episode way back too, so This only comes up during Sanderson discussions. But Charles thought he was lift, am I right? And he thought he could just eat. There we go. I could just eat and eat, and then. Yeah, there's a picture of this. It is so many wings, 50 large wings. Betty could eat 50 of them.
So,
they were breaded.
It was serious. It was serious.
And I mean, this is a man. I'm looking at a man who ate 8 patties across 2 burgers in one sitting. So this is not a man who goes down easily in these food eating competitions. But yeah, the bet was whoever won, if you ate 50 wings, then I pay for the entirety of the meal. And if you couldn't, then you pay for the entirety of the meal. But what no one likes to talk about is that somehow your brother Chris weaseled his way into a free meal no matter what. So
that sounds about right.
The true mastermind, yes, is your brother Chris. Yeah. So
that's a Sanderson character right there. That'd be quite the twist. It's like, I win either way.
Yes.
Michael Kramer's voice for Chris would be like, and then I will win no matter what. Free wings for me.
Right. So, anyway, Yasna came back at the. Yasna came back, and you said that reminded you of other points you wanted to make.
Yes. So, okay, we've read a lot of Sanderson over the decades, right? I've read The Wheel of Time. I've read his early works. And to read something that's much more recent, there's some interesting developments with Sanderson that I really like. And one of them is kind of his more openness to show more direct violence than ever before. One of the scenes that reminds me of it is, watching Yasna get stabbed through in front of Shallan's eyes. Yeah. And then the other one is when Shallan is strangling her dad. It's very macabre and very brutal, and it's direct. Sometimes in Mistborn you'd walk into a room, and then
she's singing during it.
Oh yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. She's
okay,
singing,
and he's
the lullaby,
kind of awake too. She thought that she poisoned him, and he turned out to be coming back slowly. So he's just conscious enough to realize he's getting strangled. It's very it's
so
a lot.
Traumatizing.
It's a lot, and I was impressed. I was like, go Sanderson, because he would used to I remember in Mistborn. It's like, and then they walked in and there's blood all over the walls, and you're like, well, you know, it would have been nice to see some of that. You know, he kind of always like had the camera off in another direction when violence was happening, and this was like a very like camera focused,
well, like gruesome violence.
Yeah, gruesome violence, and this was gruesome. I mean, she's strangling.
He was always
her
willing
dad.
to show some,
but
yeah,
I thought this was a lot for a Sanderson book, and I think it's a trend, a trajectory that he's going that I really liked to see, and a lot of that had to do with the Yasna scene at the beginning. I was like, okay, like this was a character I thought was going to be around for a long time, and she's gone, and I was like, cool, that's actually interesting and a good inciting incident for Shallan to be cut too soon from her connection to her mentor, and how is she gonna kind of sink or swim in these moments. And then like she got run through, dude. Like the I think the description was like this, so like she was on the ground and the dude brought the sword like through her and into like the ship, and you're like, oh man, she got run through.
And clearly Shallan's recalling it as like, I saw the sword go through her heart.
Yeah,
it's like this should have been unambiguous,
right? She's dead.
But anyway, go on.
And so that was great. And then the strangling scene we've already talked about. So then to get to where you were going with the ending with Yasna.
Yeah. So if you stayed until the post-credit scene, you saw Wit like talking to
the
a bunch of
Doctor Strange kind of
I
portal opens.
Yeah. Right. And then Yasna shows up, who's been gone this entire 1,000+ page book.
And in
so
a strange
you do have
choice,
time to settle in.
By Samuel L. Jackson, which just a weird casting choice, but it really ties the whole movie universe together, I gotta say.
Yeah, definitely. So she comes back, and it's been 1,000+ pages. You've had time to settle into like, oh, she's actually gone. Because it does have the feel of like, oh, I can't believe Sanderson just brutally murdered this character that it felt like he was setting up for a much larger arc.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll say that's not really... I think a lot of times when Sanderson kills a character, it feels like, okay, this makes sense now. This is the end of their arc. And part of what was interesting about the Yasna... now end up being a fake out, but the idea of Yasna dying that early is, what you were talking about, Charles. It's unexpected, and it's cutting the strings that were attached to Shallan too soon, or not too soon from a writing perspective, but too soon from like a perspective of Shallan having the opportunity to really learn everything that she should learn to grow as a character. And those are interesting setups. And I really liked it too, Charles.
And the whole first book is like she's finally become the pupil of Yasna, and she can finally learn these things. And it's like, nope, she's dead now.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I always have mixed feelings in these kind of moments, but I'm the kind of reader where I almost root for the story to be good, like, or at least enjoyable, over a lot of times rooting emotionally for like a character I like to live. Sometimes I'd rather a character I like to die if it feels right than have that character just keep living because I like them. And Yasna, I think, falls into that category for me, where I felt like it was an interesting development. I liked Sanderson's willingness to just pull the trigger on that. And then after going through, it happens really early in the book, after going through 1,000+ pages, I think, or close to it, of her being gone, to bring her back, I don't know, it felt a little like a cheap resurrection ploy. And I don't know, I was like, Sanderson, like, you're better than that. Others might have other opinions, but that's how I felt.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I'm not really dead. Through the powers of unexplained magic, I'm back and better than ever. And I'm sure Sanderson is going to continue to develop what was happening in that epilogue and how she was able to come back and make it an exciting thing. But to me, it was like, you created such a powerful moment, ripping this character away from us too soon. You know, it felt like a loss for the story to take it away. It was a bold choice. And then it kind of undercuts some of the boldness when you bring her back. I mean, at least you didn't bring her back in the 11th hour, and it's like, and then Yasna the White rose up and saved everybody and with this army of fresh troops. She stormed the she marched over the Parshendi and won the day. You know, it's like, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But she is brought back in a very like Marvel end credits scene kind of way. So you're like, well, I'll see where it goes. I'm not particularly excited about it. I kind of liked her being dead, but she is a good character, and I wouldn't mind more of her. So I'm open to it. And like, in Sanderson we trust. You know, he's yet to let me down, really, truly. So we'll see where it goes. But I don't think it's worth that moment. Like, we got to read that whole book thinking that moment was true, and the whole book was written that way. Like, Yasna's gone, and Shallan did have to go through her own thing, and then that we got that. So if you want to bring Yasna back, I don't think it undercuts too much of what we've already experienced, but it does make us question, like, so who can really die and who's not? Like, in books, I'm like, okay, if I see the body, then that person is dead, bro. But in this, it's like, okay, you can see them get run through in the heart, and they can still come back. Interesting. So we'll see. I think there's a lot of magic that still has to be explained. Like, the book can get, at least for me, the book got kind of intimidating at times, especially with like the interludes, and like, this book went deeper into the magic than The Way of Kings did, I felt like. So there's a lot of extra magic stuff to learn. And it wasn't like Mistborn, where it was very digestible and played out through the action. Like, there's a lot of ominous stuff going on. This is magnum opus. He's building up a lot of things. He's not making, he doesn't want you to understand everything right away, and he's okay to wait 1,000 pages to explain everything, because it's all part of his masterwork, his massive web, the biggest web he's ever written, and it's all going to come together. So that's a little bit intimidating at points, but I don't think Sanderson will ever lose trust of a reader like me who's like kind of bouncing in between his books and not studying it super seriously, and I know he'll still make it entertaining for me. It just kind of felt like in some of those moments with like Yasna coming back and a lot of the other magic stuff going on in this book, I'm like, do I fully understand what's happening here? Like, is this supposed to make sense, or Yasna's just back now? Like, I don't know. And that kind of makes me, that happens a lot. Like, it happens in something like what is it? I'm looking at Deadhouse Gates here. Well, Malazan. It's kind of like that, where it's like, am I supposed to understand everything right now? Like, is this what's happening?
Well, yeah, and usually those are, like, Erickson and Sanderson are like the two most different authors in terms of the reading experience possible, in terms of Sanderson making it so accessible, and Erickson, the Malazan series, is known for being incredibly dense and hard to decipher. So there are moments, but it's like you said, Charles, in Sanderson we trust. You know that whenever he does do something when it comes to the world building and the magic system that seems hard to understand at first, that he'll get you there. He'll help you understand, because he is so respectful of the reader and the reader experience. And you also said, Charles, that you know it's going to be entertaining. I think that's a guarantee. We have this setup where, the Everstorm is here. And we got that really intense showdown with the Parshendi, and it was a lot of Parshendi that got slaughtered. We got all those Eshonai point of views leading up to it, and culminated like this. Most of the people are able to escape, but Everstorm has been summoned, and looks like we've got some mass destruction on the way. So don't worry, there's going to be a lot to deal with for our heroes in Oathbringer. But
I'm excited for
now,
it, man. I mean, the
me
Stormlight
too.
Archive.
We're gonna dive in quick too.
We're gonna dive in, and the Stormlight Archive is just one of those series in modern fantasy. It's one of the very few that there's just always buzz. It's still ongoing. Like, there's still a few more books to read, and I'm excited to be caught up. I always felt like this was such a huge hole in my fantasy reading library that I'm these giant 1,000+ page holes in my reading library that I was just waiting for the moment to get into, and I'm glad we're doing it. And it's some cutting edge stuff from Sanderson. I feel like I'm watching him kind of, put together his masterpiece. I just see the frantic artist making expanding his ambition wider than he's ever done before, and that's exciting to see too. So I'm in for it. Let's see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm in for it too. And listeners, you'll be in for an episode on Oathbringer before too long, maybe.
Hopefully.
I mean, we've got some other stuff to read coming up too, but we're not going to make you wait as long as we did between The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. Mm-hmm. We're going to get this one out to you probably within a month or so. So that's accurate, right, Charles? So
maybe less than 2 months, but probably longer than a month. The or so part is very important.
Or so.
Emphasis
on the or so.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much what we have for you. I hope you all enjoyed this one. I always love talking about Sanderson's work. He gives you so much to talk about, and I think it's the one word that comes to mind most for me is satisfying. That's what I think of when I think of Sanderson's work, because he delivers on everything that he sets up in a way that you're gonna feel good about how it all came together, even if it's tragic in some ways or bittersweet in other ways. It's just like you feel like that's a story well told, and the promises he set up, he followed through. So I think, and that's in contrast to even some writers that we love their work, but they don't always leave you feeling satisfied, the emotion of satisfaction, even when the writing's great. Brand, sometimes, like you that's still want I'm sure, Charles, you're thinking of like, I mean, we absolutely love Joe Abercrombie's work. You mentioned Joe Abercrombie earlier. We've interviewed him. He's a super nice guy. And that being said, he intentionally leaves you dissatisfied at time in service of trying to like make points with his story and kind of finish it in a way that's really true to the characters and what they would actually do and feels realistic. You have to be realistic about these things, Charles.
You sure do.
So there are times where you don't feel that even in books by authors we love. And I just know when I'm cracking up a Sanderson book, be it a novella that's like 200 pages or so, or one of these giant Chihuahua killers that's over 1,000 pages, I'm going to leave feeling satisfied. And I do on this one, Words of Radiance. I'm sure you do too, Charles. And listeners, I hope you feel satisfied with our coverage of it.
Well said. Brandon Sanderson's always delivered on a smaller scale. It's hard to think of like the Mistborn trilogy as a smaller scale, but it is. And now to see that kind of skill and aptitude and consideration taken into the epic fantasy world with these 1,000-page tomes, it's exciting. And I think he's going to do something with these bigger series that his predecessors haven't been able to do. And I'm excited to see him finish it. He's going to get compared to people like Robert Jordan, Steve Erickson, like these guys that have written big 1,000-page door stoppers, like 12 books, like the kind that like hardcore epic fantasy fans love. And now that Sanderson's stepping into that fully on his own, yes, he finished The Wheel of Time, but now he's fully stepping into his own. I think seeing his style and his ability to deliver, like you've described, focused in on this epic story is going to be something for the fantasy books. I really do. And I'm excited to continue the journey. Like, I don't know. I think he's going to change the game.
Something.
Like, it's exciting to see.
He already has changed the game
for sure.
in a lot of ways.
Fair.
I mean, he had the most successful Kickstarter of all time.
Right.
I mean, this is a guy who is really doing his part in bringing fantasy to the forefront, to the mainstream. And I think something that can get lost in people's coverage, at least in our like niche fantasy communities at times, it's all like, it's of course awesome to support like authors that aren't as big as Sanderson as well, but a service that Brandon Sanderson is doing is bringing so many people into reading the genre, and those people then end up reading a lot of times some of these other books that don't get the same amount of pop in the mainstream. So when I see Sanderson having that level of success, that level of popularity, I just think it's so great for the genre overall. And we're happy to hopefully be contributing to that.
That's well said, Dylan. And I think he's going to continue to contribute even more. Like, the guy just doesn't stop. So super excited to see what the future brings. And in terms
as
of
Michael Jordan once said, the roof is the ceiling. Or did he say the ceiling is the roof? It was one of those.
Did he say that? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's like his Hall of Fame induction speech, and he just like at one point he's trying to be like inspirational, and he just like toward the end he was like, "The roof is the ceiling," and it's just like this weird moment where it's like for a brief second you think like, wait, wait, does that mean something? And it's like, no. That doesn't mean anything.
Is that deep, or is that just a statement?
Yeah. It's like, I'll see. I want to get. It's almost definitely the roof is the ceiling, or the ceiling is the roof. Let's see if Michael Jordan said the ceiling is the roof.
Oh, he said the ceiling is the.
The ceiling is the roof.
Wow.
So the ceiling is the roof for
There's
Brandon
only
Sanderson.
one Jordan in my mind, and it's Robert Jordan, and he said more eloquent things than that. I love Michael Jordan, but that's okay.
Sure, he did say more eloquent things than that. But Michael Jordan has also said more eloquent things than that.
And he's
I think
also
just
won
like almost
a lot of
anyone who has
too,
spoken,
so you got to give him that.
Yeah, he's got that over Robert Jordan.
Yeah, Robert Jordan.
Almost anyone who's spoken. Yeah, almost anyone who's spoken has said something more eloquent than the ceiling is the roof. So
well,
it's a pretty low bar.
It sounds deep though. It's kind of inspirational.
It does.
I'm feeling good about it.
That's part of the beauty of it, and it was, I think, in his like Hall of Fame inductions. Maybe it wasn't. He was definitely trying to be inspirational though.
You know what else I find inspirational? Our sweet, sweet outro music. What do you say we get that pumping?
We should probably get that pumping. Once we've gone into discussion of NBA greats, you know that we have probably digressed to the point where the episode should end. So let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you all very, very much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, let us know. Come and follow us over on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram, and the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter. We'd love to talk to you, and the follow helps a lot. We greatly appreciate that. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than just following us on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. You can now do that on Spotify. It's just 2 clicks at the top of our Spotify page where you listen. So really awesome if you can do that. You can also rate and review on Apple Podcasts. And everyone, this stuff is super helpful for us. We're just two friends putting this together on our own little indie podcast with no corporate back or anything. We're demonetized. We just do it for the love of the game.
For the love of the game.
Unlike Michael Jordan, who did it for the millions and millions and millions of dollars.
And the fame.
And the fame as well. So we don't do it for either of those things. We do it for you, lovely listeners. So rating and reviewing is great, but just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Well said, Dylan. Just listening, more than enough. You guys are awesome. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of this extra lengthy Chihuahua killer of an episode. We appreciate
this will
it.
Kill an audio Chihuahua.
Exactly. So thank you all so much for listening. We greatly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.